welcome to Basslines. I'm Frances Rahaim, and my special guest today is none other than Rebecca Baldini, who is here to share stories with us about these beautiful instruments and their history in the hands of her husband, professional bassist, conductor, and teacher, Don Baldini. So cozy up, turn those cell phones off, and spend a little time with me and this lovely lady, getting to know a little bit more about their life together and these instruments beside us.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Frances. I feel funny to be in Don's chair.
Yeah,
I've watched so many episodes over and over. I love hearing the stories.
This show was dedicated to Don, and we did it for Don. And the hardest thing we will talk about today, we have lost Don Baldini.
Yeah.
I promised I wouldn't cry.
We won't, because we're here to be joyful and remember.
We are. And so you're here to carry on this tradition today, at least, to tell us the history of these instruments. And Don left us in March of 2024. But we had planned to do a show like this with both of you. I wanted to have you both come on and interview you both about the stories surrounding these instruments, because Don had such a long career. And we didn't have time, unfortunately, to get this done. But thank you for coming to do this.
My pleasure.
And I know that you've prepared well. I have to say that I have almost no idea where we're headed with this, and I love it.
It'll
like
be a
that.
fun surprise.
That was exactly what it was with Don. We would just,
I don't have the suitcase, but I have a file folder. So.
And you have the book.
I have the book.
The little
I've
book.
got the people. We can spin off from there and see where we end up.
If folks had not seen any of the Basslines shows, you can certainly look them up, but you'll note that I sometimes asked Don to reference this little book, which I had taken a picture of, with many of the musicians' names that he worked with, people like Frank Sinatra, and I mean, you name it. There was a long list of musicians. And that book was among the missing for some time, but you've brought it back. Would you mind showing it and telling the story?
So this was just kind of the little book where I would jot notes, and it tended to be when we were driving in the car. I would say, okay, well, let's add to the list. Who can you think of? And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of people. And sometimes he'd say, well, read me the list. And then he'd say, oh, wait, I forgot about this person. Oh, I never mentioned this. Oh, no one's heard of this person, but maybe someone has. Yeah. And so that's usually how we got to talking about things and could spin off. I mean, he had a story about everyone on the list, and it makes me laugh just because of the diversity. Yes, we've got Frank Sinatra with a star next to it, but we have Liberace and Charo, Bob Newhart, and there would be a story about every single person on here. George Carlin, Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
Then we did comedians, dancers. And then here's band leaders: Harry James, Benny Goodman, Pete Fountain, Al Hurt, Louis Bellson, Mel Torme, Buddy Greco, Warren Covington, Larry Elgott, and Buddy DeFranco. I would tell her in the car, so she would write stuff down in the car. I can't believe it. I mean, I didn't even remember. My list is very short compared to hers.
Mitzi Gaynor was one of my favorite stories.
I might ask you to tell that story. I experienced that right here on the show. I think I was reading names one day, or maybe it was off the air, and I got to Paul Anka, and he said, "Oh, I forgot Paul Anka." And I think you did. Did you have a CD from him?
I did. This is a compilation,
Yeah.
And so they don't actually list any of the band members. I know. Did he ever show his watch when he was here?
Yes.
His Paul Anka watch.
Yes.
So he has a watch that was given to him as a gift from Paul Anka, and he used to say that this was when he was in California, he would play with roughhouse with his dog, Fox, the Irish setter, and Fox would bite his wrist and crack the crystal on his watch, and he'd take it. There was only one jeweler in Beverly Hills, and the jeweler on the second time said, "Please get a Timex." But the watch was from Paul Anka.
Yes.
It's engraved on the back, and I
Yes.
know that they recorded at Muscle Shoals, and he loves talking about that and what a special place that was. And I think most people feel that way who've had an opportunity to record there. So. Yeah,
Thank you for bringing all of this.
Sure.
I have a sense that we may not get through everything, but I would certainly love it if you would stay with us or do a second show and continue to do this, because I just don't want to cut the story short, which is what Basslines was about. I did experience seeing that watch firsthand on more than one occasion. Last time was at your home, upstairs, where he took it off and gave the story again. I do want to say that first of all, you're a fine musician and a teacher in your own right. And so it's not like, hey, here's Don's wife telling us about his life. You guys were really partners in this sort of thing. Not that you were on the road with Sinatra, but as Don was our bass player, in recent years, and was becoming more and more ill and still wanted to play, you were schlepping this stuff.
Yes, hauling all this in today was like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah. And so I hope you don't mind me saying, but beforehand I said, oh, you're so tall. And you said, no, I'm 5'5". So this tiny framed woman is carrying this stuff. And what does she have to say about it? Well, at least it's not my harp.
Right. So my primary instrument is harp.
Yes.
So anytime it's me to help with a bass, I'm like, it's just a bass. It's not a harp.
Yeah, you've been so sweet about that and so supportive, as only a fellow musician would be. So I wanted to say these instruments that are here with us, and there are 5 total. There's 2 basses, 2 acoustic basses, 2 electric basses,
and
one is in the case, and the violin. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we're looking at in excess of $50,000 easily for value of instruments. So if somebody is watching this show right now and you're thinking, why are they talking about those instruments? Rebecca has organized this sort of chronologically, and will bring us through some stories. So starting with the violin?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think everyone who knows instruments knows, like, sometimes the most valuable, best sounding instruments are the ones that are very unassuming looking.
Like the one in this case that we'll get to.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's our surprise.
This is, you may or may not have talked about it with Don, but he started off his musical career as a violinist, and he came home from school with a note. They had taken a test at school about your child shows aptitude in music, and he should pursue music. And his parents were immigrants and said, oh, well, Uncle Harry has a violin, so you will play the violin. And there was really no choice in it for him, but so that's how he became a violinist. And Uncle Harry is Oreste Fornari, and he emigrated from Italy, from the Emilia-Romagna region, in 1906. He came to the United States. He brought his violin with him. The violin, the maker on the violin is Giuseppe Vignali, and his life years are from 1888 to 1918, I believe. And he died of the Spanish flu. So that's why his life was cut short. Yeah. And I corresponded with an expert in violins in Italy that came about because Donna and I visited an instrument museum in Venice. And I had taken a picture of a sign. I didn't take a picture of the instrument, but the sign was what excited me because it was a violin by Giuseppe Vignali. And I was like, I think that's the same as yours. So when I was doing some research, I actually reached out to the museum, who sent me to the proprietor of the collection. And it turned out to be the proprietor who owns the collection of museums. And
Stroke of luck.
Name is Artemio. But I asked him, do you know anything about Giuseppe Vignali? And the town that he was active in is called Verrucchio, and it's very close to where Oreste Fornari was from. So it makes sense that at the time he probably went and got a violin from a local maker. And now the story was that he probably would have gone on to become a famous maker. Artemio says that by age 18, he was already competing with the known makers of the day and had won a competition in Padua for his varnish. So he unfortunately, his life was cut very short, so there are not many instruments. But this is the violin that Don started on in Racine, Wisconsin, that came from Italy. And I have some
Well, before you move
photos.
on, yes, photos
Yeah,
would be
sure.
great, but I just want to tell the people listening that you actually teach the violin.
I do. I joke that when I play with an orchestra, I play harp.
Yes.
And if there's a piece that doesn't have harp, I sit in the back of the second violins.
But you teach little
But
kids.
I teach little kids, and I'm a Montessori teacher by training. My certification is in 3 to 6 year olds. I love the age group, and they're enthusiastic, and so my specialty is really very young beginners.
By way of wanting the public to know a little bit about you, I didn't ask permission to tell this, but is it true that you sold one of your harps to buy 30 violins to do this program?
No,
okay.
not really. I did sell one of my harps to buy more little harps that I did do a class for children. So I have a set of 5 small harps that.
This is why it's important to get the story straight from you.
Yeah. Well,
I had remembered part of it, but not all of it.
yeah. No, that's okay. So
That's such a generous thing to do.
So right, yeah, it's fun. They're. I mean, all of us who are involved in music know that we need to cultivate that next generation, or there won't be anymore. So
that's true.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you, but you were talking about photos. You brought some photos.
I did.
Which we may have to get
I
some
did.
close-ups
Well, first,
for them.
so Don had talked about when Uncle Harry wanted to play the violin in Italy, there was a traveling teacher who said, well, first you need to do all these exercises. I'll leave you with this, and I'll come back in a year.
A year?
A year.
Wow.
And I found the exercise. So this is all in Italian, giving the instructions to Uncle Harry about playing. And if you open it up, it's all in manuscript. So this is what he was expected to do on his own
For a year.
before, and then if he did all this, then the teacher would deem him worthy of giving lessons to.
Isn't that something?
So Uncle Harry never pursued. He would have loved to have been a violinist. He was the oldest son in his family. Yeah. He had a sense of responsibility. He emigrated to the U.S. and gradually brought over his family. So I think it was his dream and his love and his passion, but he never got to pursue it as his career.
Boy, fascinating treasure trove of things that you've got. What do you think the value is on this violin? Do you know anything about its current value?
I think the most recent evaluation was $15,000.
$15,000, and that was.
It was last year because I was traveling with it and I needed to have it insured for traveling. Yep. So
that's beautiful.
It's a pretty obscure maker, like we talked about. His life was cut short, so there's not a lot of instruments to compare to. But.
And you were traveling with it, which means it's the first time that's been back to Italy?
Yes, I was in Italy this summer. I went to summer music in Tuscany. And that's a picture of me in the theater. I played violin. I met some wonderful people. I wanted to be in Italy. I wanted to be busy for my first trip back to Italy without Dawn. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go play some violin. And so it was the first time that the violin had been back in Italy since 1906.
How about that?
And
how about that?
It felt.
Did you
great.
enjoy your trip?
I did. Yeah.
Yes. I can hear it. I can hear it.
Oh.
Yes, you enjoyed your trip.
Yes.
And so did you.
I think it's happy to be played.
I think, yeah. Financial Fitness with the Money Doctor is sponsored by Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented. Financial coaching and more information at hugyourmoney.com.
I brought some photos of Dawn in elementary school or middle school as a violinist. That was a photo that was in the newspaper in Racine. I found a treasure trove of
really
things.
did.
So here's the original newspaper clipping from 1954 of a violinist who visited Racine to play a concert, Mr. Rubinoff. And it's so that he visited the school and the children at school with his Stradivarius, and Don is in the picture holding the Stradivarius, and the newspaper clipping says that the violinist is pictured with left to right, and it lists the students and Don Baldwin. Gee, was Don's comment as Rubinoff put the Stradivarius in his hands.
Well, he was a man of few words at that age, apparently.
I was going to say, have you ever known him to be at a loss for words?
Never, never.
Don is a young violinist.
Oh my gosh, they're just great.
And so Don actually went to Indiana University as a violinist. He got a scholarship to play violin. They were trying to build their strings program into what became the Jacob School of Music, which is now renowned for people like Joshua Bell. And it was a really high caliber faculty that they had brought in. And he played in opera orchestras, he played in symphony orchestras. I found there was a program, the college, he talks about doing operas, and I think that's probably where he developed his love of opera. Well, he talks about growing up Italian, that opera was always on the radio, but he is listed as a second violin in that program, so he really did go to IU as a violinist.
There he is.
And I got
Rigoletto.
Another picture, which I would say is his college.
Oh, okay. You got to dig the shoes here, because Don loved great shoes.
Yes.
And you share that.
Yes.
You share a lot of things in
Yes.
common, but great shoes were one of them. Oh my gosh, it's great. Same stance, same bulky kind of stance. He was like a staunch kind of guy,
well,
right?
I mean, he was like a big guy in a kind of a short body.
He was.
You know?
He had huge hands.
Huge hands.
Yep.
Yeah.
Big feet, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Long arms.
Yep.
So
which kind of leads us to these a little bit. So you've brought 2 acoustic basses and 2 electric basses. This is the bass Don played in our band, right?
Yes.
You call this the little bass.
I call this the little bass, which it's a normal size bass. A normal size bass is a three-quarter bass.
Yeah.
I call this one big bass because this bass is a 7/8 bass, which is bigger than normal.
So he would play this in larger orchestras, etc.
In later years, it was kind of divided, jazz and classical. I think that division, that line was blurred when he was still in California. This is the bass he acquired it when he was at Indiana University from a female student who was quitting. He paid $300 for it, and for the extra $50, he got the trunk that is still
trunk
in our garage.
Yes, yeah.
Huge, and that is the bass that's kind of been. I mean, that bass has been
That's his
with
baby.
him since 1960, probably.
Yeah, and it's on all these records, concerts. It's all over the place.
Because it fit in the trunk. This was usually the bass that traveled.
Yeah,
because
cartage, right?
It could go. It's been to Japan. It's been to Europe, because of the trunk. So.
Yeah, I think we told the story at one point that he hadn't changed the strings on this bass since
1974.
73, 74, okay.
Yeah.
And it just has such a big, full, lovely, mellow sound. I remember thinking, please don't change the strings. I hope he doesn't change the strings now.
And he has the strings.
Yeah.
He has the strings, but he always said, well, what if I don't like it after?
Yeah.
And he liked that for playing through an amp, that it was a little deader. And he had the pickup that's on there has been on there forever. He actually had the bridge on the big bass drilled in order to be able to switch them back and forth, but he never did. So that one is the bass, his original bass, and when he started playing at IU, I have some pictures of when he switched to the bass. This is him with George Gaber on drums, who was a teacher at IU. Mike Berkowitz helped me out with this. Mike Berkowitz is a drummer who's a dear friend, and he said, "Oh yes, that was my teacher." And then Al Cobine is the sax player in the picture. And so he's kind of making the transition to, or supplementing his classical with jazz. And he used to tell this story about walking down the hallway in the dorm on the way to opera orchestra and hearing this recording, and what is that? And can I come back and listen when I'm done with the rehearsal? And I can't remember what it is, so we're gonna have to. I know he's told the story to enough people. Someone, and at the time, Indiana University didn't take jazz very seriously. It was something that the students did on their own time, preferably not in the practice rooms. They didn't really want to be attached to it. And then they went and won the Notre Dame Jazz Festival.
Wow.
So here's some programs that Don had saved from the Notre Dame Jazz Festival, and he's listed as a bass player in these programs from the Notre Dame Jazz Festival.
It's something about jazz that that seemed to have happened at the colleges like that. Dominic will tell a story about, I think, being at Harvard and having to go to bat and getting a jazz program going outside. And they got some support for it and did it. I hope it was Harvard and not Berkeley. I'm sure it was Harvard, but
he'll correct us if we're wrong.
Yeah, he will. But people just people didn't value it in the same way as popular music that was on the radio. You heard it all the time, and but musicians do.
And I think because of that, Don was really sensitive to jazz musicians being taken seriously and always presenting himself extremely professionally.
Yes.
He did not like it in later years when jazz musicians would show up looking unkempt or sloppy or not put together. I can think of one person in particular he would always comment about, and just that you're a musician and present yourself as such. I don't know if he ever told the story back, his very first violin teacher in Racine, Wisconsin. I'll get the name wrong, so I'll leave it out. But Slama, Elmer Slama.
Amazing that you remember.
And he remembered all this, but would tell him, I guess he came to his lesson one day with dirty hands, and he made him go wash, and he said, "You're always on stage at Carnegie Hall. That's how you should present yourself." And it's something that sticks with you once he's told you that. And I think, he told his students at Keene State and Dartmouth that for many years, like, if you're going to bother to do it right. Project professionalism, be on time, look the part.
He would say, always be clean, always be ready.
Have your instrument better be ready, and your car better be working, and that those are the opportunities. But you're always on stage at Carnegie Hall. That's and so whether it was classical or jazz, he really wanted to instill in them that you're a professional.
I knew we would never get through this in one show, and I didn't want to. We have about 5 minutes left for this segment, but you will stay with us and continue to talk to us about this. Okay, great. So
I know we're still at Indiana University.
We're still at Indiana University, but that's not a bad place to be. When was the last time he played this bass? Do you have a story about that?
Sure. Actually, February.
That's what I thought,
we were both playing together in the Keene Chamber Orchestra, and he was at a rehearsal, I want to say February 13th, because we played the concert that weekend, and he was at a Tuesday night rehearsal on February 13th and just was really fatigued. And that was the last time he played that bass.
I asked that story not because I wanted to bring you pain or anything, but I knew that even though Don was ill, quite ill. He had cancer, and he had had it for many years, and
he died less than 3 weeks
March
after
4th,
that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so he did play right up until he
really
could
did.
not physically play anymore.
He really did. I remember him coming to a gig, one of our performances, with a hemoglobin level of like 5.2.
Or just having gotten...
Or transfusions. Yeah, I got a transfusion, I'll be fine. But it just speaks to how much the music was in his blood.
Yes.
He absolutely had to play. He cleaved to these instruments. And they had this incredible history on the road with him from every place from Japan, all around the world, right?
And at times he talked about, I should sell some things, or I have 2 electric basses, I don't really need that. And but it was never going to happen. And I told him, you couldn't. They're your children. I mean, you don't have to do that.
He talked to me about it too, and he would put dollar amounts on them and say, I think I could sell, for instance, this bass that's in this box, I'm never going to play that bass again. Or is that was the one he was thinking of? That's all original.
Yes.
For anybody looking at this, and we will come back with that, of course. But he would talk about it. But you're absolutely right. They were like his children. And it is unusual to have you here. I mean, I think a lot of people would not have done what you're doing. It's not the easiest thing to do. But it is about being joyful and celebrating this great life that Don had. And you enjoyed with him for how many years?
10 years.
10 years, for 10 years. And again, just that you were so supportive and so much in it with him. That we would sometimes book things like, okay, we have a gig date, can you make it? Well, I don't know, I think Rebecca's away. Right? Because you were driving him, you were loading and unloading this stuff.
I was the roadie.
I mean, at the end, we got special chairs,
No, we were all working together to facilitate him being able to play, because I think that's, that was his identity, and it gave him self-worth and value. And
yeah, and we always left it open. If you can't come, even last minute, it's fine. We can play without the bass player for the night. It's not the same without you, right? But there's no pressure. And he just really, really wanted to do it.
Yes.
And so, I think it's important to have his children around us right now, all 5 of them, and to talk about these things. What I'd like to know is a story, just a brief story about how you came up with all this memorabilia, because I think you didn't have your hands on all of this initially, right?
I didn't. I've just been obviously forced to go through a lot of things in our house, and I think Don talked about being a woodworker, and so he has a shop that's full of instruments. That's usually where he kept his instruments. I know Dominic has been to a rehearsal in his shop. Tools, trains, and so in the process of going through some things, I found the box, and it hurts my heart that I didn't have it in hand to go through it with him, so that he could tell me about a lot of the things. But the things in the box, I have to also credit his mother, because it goes back to elementary school artwork. And pictures, like early pictures, like childhood pictures. And so we started at middle school, and that was not the beginning of the box. So, Well,
I want to thank you for doing this and for staying with us for more conversation about this. And if you have to go, I'm going to say thank you for watching Basslines. Remember, you don't have to thank us or laugh at our jokes. Sit deep and come often. You're one of the folks. We'll see you in a few moments or the next time right here on Basslines.